On this Tuesday night, is the historic U.S. North Korea summit in jeopardy? Donald Trump admits it may not happen. Why Pyongyang seems to be having second thoughts. Plus, Trump's public promise to get Kim Jong-un to change his tune.
Also tonight, BC fights Alberta in court to keep the oil flowing. And
Harry and Meghan make their debut as a married couple. More on the lucky Canadians who scored an invite.
this is The National.
If there was ever a doubt that the U.S. president would ever meet face-to-face with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump himself made that uncertainty real today. Even as he welcomed the South Korean president to the White House today to talk about the summit, Trump told reporters there's a substantial chance the June meeting won't happen. So why the seeds of doubt? Paul Hunter takes on that question.
For the record, as Donald Trump today greeted South Korea's president outside the West Wing for talks on the upcoming summit with North Korea, that summit is still on. But
there's a very substantial chance that it won't work out, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it won't work out over a period of time.
The reason? Citing U.S. South Korean military exercises, North Korea's tone has lately hardened, with North Korea's Kim Jong-un seemingly hedging on earlier hints that he'd agree to U.S. demands and denuclearize. And though Trump today said he still believes Kim wants this to happen,
but I think he's absolutely very serious, yes.
The big question, is it a bona fide chance for Trump to make history, or is he being played by Kim? Something Trump is said to be privately worried about. After all those missile tests and back-and-forth insults between the two leaders, Trump has long said he's prepared to abandon the summit if Kim fails to agree to his terms. But that still risks embarrassment for Trump, having come this close.
There's a good chance that we'll have the meeting.
Today, Trump seemed to be encouraging Kim, underlining it'll be worth it, even seemingly pledging protection for his regime.
He will be safe. He will be happy. His country will be rich. He will be able to look back and be very proud of what he did for North Korea.
For his part, Kim is said to be studying Trump's psyche by reading his book, The Art of the Deal, and as well, the more controversial take on Trump, Fire and Fury.
Great honor. Thank you.
Back in the Oval Office, it was clear that South Korea sure wants the summit to proceed. Its president today, more than once, lavished praise on Trump for his leadership on this. All of this is possible, said Moon Jae-in, because of you, Mr. President. Bottom line, planning and preparation for the June 12th summit continues, at least for now. Andrew.
Okay, so Paul, there are the military exercises that seem to be an issue, but Donald Trump also pointed to China today.
Yeah, recall those two meetings Kim Jong-un had with the Chinese leadership not long ago. Trump said today it was after the second of those meetings that he noticed a change in North Korea's tone. In his words today, maybe nothing happened, maybe it did. The U.S. absolutely wants China to keep pressuring North Korea to denuclearize. Trump made no specific allegation about China, but as he put it, he can't say he's happy about what may or may not have happened at that meeting. That said, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also talked today about pressure from China on North Korea. Here's his lay of the land.
The Chinese have offered historic assistance in the pressure campaign. Literally historic assistance. President Trump has made clear, and I've made clear too, that it is incredibly central that that pressure remain in place and that China continue to participate in that pressure campaign, and we have every reason to expect that they will continue to do so.
As Trump put it, yet again today, we'll see what happens. Andrew.
Paul Hunter, thanks very much. So, the summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un may not happen. We'll see what happens. But North Korea is still pressing ahead with a promise to dismantle a major nuclear facility while making sure everyone knows about it.
If they dismantle the nuclear site, as they say they're going to do, it should be an extraordinary trip.
North Korea has invited some international journalists to Punggye-ri, a nuclear testing facility. The idea is to destroy it with the world watching.
So we've just landed here in Wonsan.
Journalists have so far been treating the trip like a travel documentary into the bizarre to witness North Korea's grand gesture for peace. But disarmament experts are suggesting we temper our expectations.
I get the opportunity to look at Punggye-ri with satellite imagery. Mostly what I see on the site is that they're moving trucks around, they're dismantling a few buildings, but largely the focus seems to be building up platforms for presumably the reporters to watch the explosions happen. It reminds me a lot of 2008 when North Korea exploded the cooling tower at their 5-megawatt reactor in Yongbyon. The cooling tower is really sort of an iconic shape. It makes people think of The Simpsons, and so exploding that made it really seem like a diplomatic win. But it didn't have very big meaning on North Korea's actual nuclear program.
또 한 차례의 지하 핵시험을 성과적으로 진행.
In fact, North Korea soon restarted the reactor and carried out years of nuclear testing, which brings us back to Punggye-ri. Even if it isn't a mirage like the cooling tower was,
they've already had 6 nuclear tests, and so they may not really even need any more. It's possible that they will stop testing new types of designs if they collapse the tunnels at Punggye-ri, but that doesn't mean that they won't make more warheads.
What's more, no actual nuclear arms experts were allowed on this trip. So to TV crews, likely it will not be clear whether this is a step towards disarmament or simply a nuclear power destroying evidence. Here's a look at what else we're working on tonight on The National: balancing press freedom and national security. The Supreme Court hears what could be a landmark case tomorrow. But tonight, the journalist at the heart of the story.
And giving names to the dead. A century later, we take you inside the process that identified 3 Canadians killed during the First World War. But first, the interprovincial brawl over the Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion has taken yet another turn today. BC is now suing Alberta as Trans Mountain's self-imposed deadline to continue with the project or not now sits at 9 days. With the clock ticking, British Columbia struck back hard at Alberta today, filing a statement of claim in Alberta court over that government's threat to turn off the oil taps to BC. BC says the legislation tabled by Rachel Notley's government last week is nothing short of an attempt to punish British Columbia. BC's Attorney General David Eby says his province's role in the delay is being mischaracterized.
Today's filing came after we repeatedly called on Alberta not to move forward with blatantly unconstitutional legislation.
And the court filing goes even further, saying in addition to economic harm, a sudden disruption in supply could injure human health and safety in remote communities.
It's very interesting. On one hand, they don't want our oil, and on the other hand, they're suing us to give them our oil. They are still reserving the right to play legal rope-a-dope until the cows come home.
The legal challenge comes the day after Notley declared she would not attend the Western Premier's meeting because it would be tone-deaf to suggest they could talk about other issues. As the provinces continue to battle it out, they also wait on movement from the federal government, either to secure a deal with Kinder Morgan before the deadline or to pass a law to clarify the pipeline is allowed and constitutionally viable.
Prime Minister, can you update us on the pipeline? Any progress on Kinder Morgan?
We continue to work very hard and diligently on getting our resources to new markets.
So the future of the pipeline waits. A lot of media attention will be focused right here tomorrow as Canada's highest court hears a case pitting police powers against press freedom. The CBC will be there with a coalition of civil liberties groups. The case, a Vice media journalist who refuses to give the RCMP his communications with a Canadian ISIS fighter. As Natalie Kalata tells us, it's a case that could have serious and broad implications.
What's at stake is bigger than Ben Maku, bigger than his job. It's about the kind of news Canadians get.
I've had journalists come up to me and say, I've talked to this individual. Do you think that what happened to you is going to happen to me?
The journalist from Vice has been locked in a legal battle with the RCMP for years over this.
We are going for you, Barack Obama.
In 2014, Maku used social media to track down ISIS member Farah Shirdon. The Calgary man infamously burned his Canadian passport in an ISIS video and threatened Canada. Not long after, the RCMP served Vice and Maku, ordering them to hand over all correspondence with Shirdon. They refused.
What I had of national security interest, I always put out there. So, I was informing the public of any danger that could come of this individual.
Vice has challenged the order in lower courts in Ontario and lost. The case is now being heard by the Supreme Court.
I'm there to provide an international perspective on this.
Paul Shabas is a lawyer representing several international NGOs tomorrow.
There still must be a balancing even then between the public interest in law enforcement and the public interest in protecting the press and protecting them and their ability to do their job.
The RCMP is trying to do theirs and protect Canadians. Lawyers representing the RCMP declined to be interviewed, instead pointed to its submission to the court. The police are seeking to obtain highly reliable evidence relating to serious terrorism offenses, which they cannot obtain from any other source, and are not required to go further and establish that the prosecutor will actually need that evidence to prove the case at trial, nor are they required to exhaust all other investigative avenues.
Journalists are not cops.
Being perceived so, says Robert Steiner of the Munk School of Global Affairs, could have widespread implications on the kind of information people should get in a free and open society.
If people stop speaking to journalists, then this fundamental part of the democratic system, this basic pipeline to understanding what's going on around us, starts to get shut down.
Already, Canada's ranking for press freedom isn't as high as many may assume. According to one index, Canada ranks 18th in the world.
It puts us behind countries like Portugal and Estonia.
The CBC is one of more than a dozen media outlets and organizations intervening in the case. As for Maku, he's holding firm.
I'm prepared to take this as far as it needs to go.
If he loses and refuses to comply with the order, Maku could face a fine or even go to jail. The Supreme Court's decision is expected to take months. Natalie Collada, CBC News, Toronto. Now, you heard Natalie mention there that Canada ranks 18th in the World Press Freedom Index. Reporters Without Borders says the Vice case is just one of the reasons. Another, the civil and criminal charges laid against the Independent's Justin Brake for filming protesters as they trespassed onto the site of the Muskrat Falls hydroelectric project in Labrador. The index also cites Quebec's provincial police spying on journalists Patrick Lagacé of La Presse and 5 journalists with CBC's French network, Radio-Canada. Then there's Bill C-51, described as using national security as an excuse to chill the free flow of information. The countries ranked as top 3 were Norway, Sweden, and the Netherlands. France, the UK, and the US all ranked much lower than Canada. Now, the press in the UK today had their cameras on a place where it has been now for a very long time, Buckingham Palace. Andrew, what was there today?
It was a garden party that was officially in honor of Prince Charles, but you could tell all eyes were right on the royal newlyweds, Harry and Meghan. It was their first public appearance as the newly minted Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It was also, of course, Meghan's first public engagement as a member of the royal family. She stood shoulder to shoulder with Charles and Camilla while her husband took to the podium to honor his father. But the significance of it all seemed to be lost on one particular uninvited guest. Here's that rude interruption.
With which William and I draw inspiration from every day. To save an input, sorry, that bee really got me.
Now, the bee aside, there were more than 6,000 guests in that crowd. And as Thomas Daigle reports, they included a few from this side of the pond.
Dressed in their most regal, Steve and Nicola Day have come from Kingston, Ontario. Their names on the guest list for the most exclusive venue in town.
We're going to Buckingham Palace, sir.
They've been down a similar road before, meeting Prince Charles a year ago at CFB Trenton. Steve Day is a retired commander with Canada's Special Forces, now coaching and consulting on security matters, thanks to retraining from Charles's charity, Operation Entrepreneur. Seeing Harry and Meghan today is just an added bonus.
We got an affinity, a natural affinity as veterans, as a veteran couple, to what he's espousing going forward.
It was a hard decision to figure out what to wear today and find just the right hat.
And there were plenty of those great hats on display in the crowd of 6,000, including Meghan's, as she and Harry met military families from Sudbury. That Canadian accent familiar to the new bride.
That's what she was saying, yeah, where we're from, that she spent 6 years there, so it was like home and
the weather.
Yep, weather,
Of course,
mosquitoes.
we're Canadian, we have to talk about that.
The star of the show today, though, was supposed to be Charles, celebrating his 70th birthday 6 months early.
So, Pa, while I know that you've asked that today not be about you, you must forgive me if I don't listen to you, much like when I was younger.
With a tribute to his father, they wrapped up their first event as Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Some who crossed the Atlantic for this ran into more Canadians than royalty.
We have spent longer waiting in line for fake princesses at Disney, so it's a pretty,
That is true.
so it was well worth the effort.
Maybe an average day for the royals, but still memorable for them. Thomas Dagler, CBC News, London.
So the spectacle was everything today, and those cameras kept zooming in for a close-up of the Duchess's ring finger. But perhaps unsurprisingly, it was her dress that got so much attention, to the point where the designer's website crashed just minutes after her appearance. Now, in case you're wondering, it was custom made by Goat, that's a British brand, and they've got some pretty high-profile clients. Gwyneth Paltrow, Victoria Beckham, and even Meghan's royal sister-in-law, the Duchess of Cambridge. Now, on a more serious note, in his speech today, Prince Harry made note of some special guests invited to the party.
I would like us to take a moment to remember all those affected by the tragic events at the Manchester Arena a year ago. We are fortunate to have over 250 representatives from the emergency services here today. It is right that we take a moment to recognize the amazing work they do every day and how each member of our blue light services rise to meet the challenge of tragic events such as the attack a year ago. Our thoughts are with those who lost loved ones and those still dealing with the experiences of that night.
22 people were killed in that bombing in Manchester 1 year ago. It was after a concert, the UK's worst terror attack in more than a decade. We will have much more special coverage of the anniversary, including the message Ariana Grande herself sent to survivors.
And Nala Ayed introduces us to a 13-year-old who was there when the bomb went off and takes us to the place where she's now finding strength.
But first, a powerful scene from Manchester tonight. Last year, this Oasis song, Don't Look Back in Anger, became an unofficial anthem of the city's perseverance. And today in Manchester, they sang it in the street. Tonight on The National, crews on Hawaii's Big Island are racing to protect a geothermal power plant from flowing lava because, well, as you can see here, it's awfully close. Crews have been draining and moving fuel away. But if the lava seeps into an active well, it could unleash deadly gases. Crews are racing to cap them all before they're overrun. And another setback tonight for the small northern community of Churchill, Manitoba. A Canadian company that planned to buy their only railroad and fix it has backed out. It's been a whole year since the line was destroyed by floodwaters, and it's the only land link to the south to bring in fuel, food, and supplies. But Churchill, the company that pulled its bid, says the federal government didn't take it seriously.
New rules are expected from Ottawa in just a few weeks that will reduce how long pilots can fly. It's the first major change in 20 years, meant to address worries about tired pilots in the cockpit. But as David Cochran explains, some pilots think they don't go far enough.
Disaster at SFO could have been one of the biggest aviation incidents in recent history.
It was a near miss that could have killed hundreds. An Air Canada flight crew mistook a San Francisco taxiway for a runway, pulling up just seconds before crashing into a row of planes. The pilots told investigators they were fatigued.
The number one concern for Canadian pilots is fatigue. This is their big concern.
Pilots are pushing for shorter flying time regulations, especially for red-eyes. Right now, Canadian pilots can fly for up to 12.5 hours at night. Ottawa's draft regulations would cut that to 10.5 hours, which Isaac says is still too long.
What our ask is of the government is, as a minimum, just get us to science, and that science is NASA's.
NASA recommends a maximum of 8.5 hours of flying at night.
So we are in the process of finalizing the flight duty regulations.
Mark Arnault is, of course, quite familiar with NASA's work.
How did you sleep?
But that doesn't mean he's budging on his proposals.
Notwithstanding my great respect for NASA, we make our own decisions based on the best available science, and I would ask you to wait till mid-June, round about mid-June, when they come out.
So you wouldn't want to be driving a car like that. You probably don't want to be flying a plane like that.
This fatigue specialist says the best available science makes it clear night flying comes with additional risk, not just at 10.5 hours, but at 8 hours too.
So if you were to compare them to how somebody would perform under various levels of alcohol, they drop down in both cases to the level that you'd expect to see in somebody who's got a legal limit or has breached the legal limit of 0.08% blood alcohol concentration.
So that's legally drunk.
The equivalent on some functions would be similar to it. So, for example, reaction time is a pretty good correlation, and the software is predicting that reaction time would be about 45% longer than a normally rested individual.
That doesn't mean the skies are full of pilots who are basically drunk. The risk can be mitigated by co-pilots spelling each other off to take naps or by using caffeine effectively. But Markwood says the risks of flying at night can't be completely eliminated. And the longer the flight, the higher those risks are. David Cochran, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, Canada's smaller carriers think the new limits will actually go too far, fearing that they'll be forced to hire more pilots at a time when the industry is already grappling with a serious pilot shortage. They say that could lead to increased costs or even put the airliners out of business and threaten services to northern, remote, and Indigenous communities that depend on aviation the most.
Well, still ahead on The National. If you don't know Johnny Orlando's name yet, you will. The latest Canadian teen sensation is on the verge of hitting it big.
All right, girls, are you excited?
One year ago today, thousands of mostly young music fans were packed into Manchester Arena for an Ariana Grande concert. Then it suddenly became a scene of chaos and mass murder. A suicide bomb killed 22 people and injured 139, more than half of them children. Today, rituals of remembrance.
If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love.
Prince William gave a Bible reading at a memorial service at Manchester Cathedral. Prime Minister Theresa May among the dignitaries in attendance.
Manchester was and is a beacon of hope, I think, around a very divided world.
A national moment of silence was observed in mid-afternoon as heightened security revealed the continuing concern over public safety. Ariana Grande tweeted her support, thinking of you all today and every day, sending you all the light and warmth I have to offer on this challenging day. Her message showed the Manchester Bee, which became a symbol of the city's resilience in the days following the tragedy. Jesse Lingard, a beloved player for Manchester U, said a lot in just a few words. Always in our hearts, never forgotten, we stand together. As we said, children bore the brunt of this terrible attack. Many young lives were shattered in a living nightmare. Their year has been spent trying to move past it. Nala Ayed got to know one girl who was only 12 when she saw what no child should see.
Far enough away from Manchester City, on a journey in search of healing, a few lucky ones can see far beyond the scars of the past. This is the story of one survivor.
Kipper, Hardy.
Yasmin Lee is only 13. But just a year into a life-changing journey, she's a girl who's grown up decades.
I'm good, yeah. And not great, but I'm not really bad. I'm kind of in the middle. I feel like comfortable, like it's just every day, like this is what happened and I'm not afraid of it. Like I'm not afraid of my trauma.
To rise above the trauma, it takes courage and it takes a village. Her family's, of course, key. The doctors, teachers, and the therapy docs.
I went with my friend. We went to the concert together.
So are the support groups, like the Peace Foundation, which cares for people affected by terrorism. They feature Yasmin in one of their videos.
We went to the top of the stairs, we went into the foyer, and then that's when it happened. I got knocked over by the force. Some of the shrapnel went through the back of my leg. I just remember seeing this bin and be like, I'm gonna hide behind this bin in case there's something else. But my friend's mum screamed, run, and she dragged me until I was on my feet. So what did you do yesterday, Jasmine? Jasmine, you say I'm still calling you Jasmine.
Since then, there have been easier days and many hard ones. Skin grafts and sometimes flashbacks, but also triumphs in the unlikeliest places. A major one made possible by Kelda Wood.
Honey!
She too nearly lost her leg and all her confidence in an accident, crushed by a bale of hay. She knows all about trauma.
I lost my identity, I lost who I was, who I wanted to be. But I decided to climb Kilimanjaro. By the time I got back home, I'd come up with the idea of climbing out. I just wanted to give other people the opportunity to kind of rediscover themselves and just realise that injury, illness, trauma, it can be life-changing, but it doesn't have to be life-limiting.
This is where the village idea really comes to life. Climbing Out counselors combine outdoor adventure with the power of a group sharing past and present. The first program for survivors of the Manchester bombing signed up 13 youth, including Yasmin.
There was a lot of anxiety, a lot of, again, one young girl turned up and, had a panic attack, shut herself in the toilet, couldn't look anyone in the eye. And I think more than anything, it was almost that feeling of them being stuck.
1 week to get them unstuck. And between climbing, kayaking, and talking, to shift their thinking from past to future, from victim to survivor. By Thursday, the anxiety and nightmares diminished. They'd climbed above the Pain to Pavey Arc in northern England, nearly 700 meters above sea level.
It felt so good, afterwards, it felt like a weight had been lifted, off my shoulders. It built my confidence so much, more than I could have imagined.
The lid just came off, and just everything came out. But the beauty was that we were then there to be able to support and help them process it. And it was like they left it up on the mountain.
Such success is precious. So to keep the momentum, Wood asks every survivor to share a short-term goal before they leave.
And Yasmin's goal was to go back into Manchester city centre, which she hadn't done since the attack.
1 week to the day, Yasmin posted this picture. She'd gone back to the city that knew the most painful moment of her past with her closest friends.
It was really nice because we were so excited and you didn't even have time to think about I was nervous.
That's the challenge, isn't it? And
for Wood, it is all intensely personal and part of her own challenging journey. It's why she's in training now to cross the Atlantic Ocean solo. She'd be the first adaptive person to make the crossing alone by boat. She's dedicating each lonely day on the water to a young survivor of trauma, including Yasmin.
If I can inspire, encourage, support other people to get out of that place and to move forwards, that will make every single mile, every bad day, every scary moment of the road completely worth it.
She's so inspirational to look up to as well. She's been through a lot and it just kind of shows that anything is possible and you can do everything.
Little darling. So a year on, Yasmin too is testing the limits with music, exactly how it all began. Here comes the sun. Today, along with the Manchester Survivors Choir, she sang to mark 1 year down.
It's so nice, you can't even describe how you just feel like you've known everyone and that you're meant to be together. And I think a year is quite significant and I've come a long way in that year and I think it's really important to remember that.
This is the past drowned out by the future. Still, it's impossible to forget. Nala Ayed, CBC News, Llangollen in North Wales.
Mental trauma plagues many people in Manchester. Police say more than 1,000 officers and support workers have accessed mental health care in the past year, and the investigation itself also continues. About 100 officers are still on the case. They believe the suicide bomber, Salman Abedi, did not act alone. In the weeks after the attack, police arrested 23 people as suspects, but all were released without charges. Now officials are waiting for the bomber's brother, Hashim Abedi, to be extradited from Libya. If he is returned to the UK, he will be charged with 22 murders and other offenses.
Well, in the wake of yet another school shooting in the United States, this time in Santa Fe, Texas, students are continuing to speak up. We saw it with Parkland, a generation calling on this to never happen again. They marched on Washington and walked out of schools in cities across the U.S. And now, 3 months later, they are back. This time with the hashtag, If I Die in a School Shooting. It's been gaining momentum on Twitter for a few days now. And we asked some of those students to read their tweets for us.
I wanted to briefly explain why I started this hashtag. It wasn't something I wanted really to do. It's something I know I had to.
If I die in a school shooting, please politicize my death. I don't want to die in vain.
If I were to die in a school shooting, I would never be able to attend another concert. I would never be able to help change the world.
If I die in a school shooting, tell my parents that I love them and that I'm sorry that I couldn't do better.
If I die in a school shooting, I will never be able to get to graduate, which is next Friday. I'll never see my mom and brother again, and I'll never see my boyfriend again. I'll never be able to move to New York City, and I'll never be able to open my own bakery.
If I die in a school shooting, I will just become another statistic and not be able to live my life to its fullest potential.
If I die in a school shooting, I won't be able to get my book published.
If I die in a school shooting, I want footage of my death to be sent to the NRA along with my carrying concealed permit, just to show them that they're failing gun owners too.
I won't have my future, and I'll just become another statistic. This is the reality of America right now.
We often hear about this notion of millennials and the gig economy. This idea that more and more young people are taking on temporary short-term work to pay the bills, a very transient workforce. But increasingly, millennials have also started taking over another sector, franchising. And as Aaron Saltzman shows us, it's a business model that may be perfectly suited to that generation.
Looks good, Cody. Keep it up.
Some helpful encouragement from the boss. On this job site, the boss is 23 years old.
I was looking for something to make a living out of, and what better way to do it with your own business?
The business is a house painting franchise called SprayNet. Karine Laundrie runs the operation in Vancouver because the last thing she wanted was a 9-to-5 job.
We're always looking for that opportunity to not stay in an office and have a boss tell you what to do all day long.
Others her age clearly feel the same way.
Finish it like that.
Some, like Laundrie, want more out of life than an old-fashioned traditional job, and some, also like Laundrie, get a helping hand.
My parents actually own the franchise, and I operate it.
But before everyone born before 1982 starts rolling their eyes and dismissing the bank of mom and dad, consider who the Landrys bought the franchise from.
You're already growing out of this place.
I'd say so. If you look around, we're one on top of the other, right? So, yeah.
That's incredible.
Meet SprayNet founder Carmelo Marsala, 31 years old, president and CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation that he started from scratch with his own money about 8 years ago when he was just 23. He and a chemist came up with a proprietary paint formula that works on just about anything. Vinyl, aluminum, brick, you name it.
We realized once we formulated this stuff, it only made sense to actually manufacture it if we had enough volume. I was a franchisee of student painting, so I said, well, the franchise model makes sense.
Each SprayNet franchise costs $125,000. There are 43 of them across Canada. Millennials own nearly a third of them.
It's not a job, right? It's your own business. So, you know, the whole thing in franchising is you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. So they still have that support to fall back on.
Here, that support comes from fellow millennials. More than 90% of SprayNet's corporate employees are under the age of 35.
Everybody here, I feel really old.
So our brand is relatively strong.
Ann Stone teaches marketing at UBC's Sauder School of Business. She's also a former vice president of Dairy Queen and Coca-Cola. She says millennials and franchising are a perfect match.
The franchising space needs new ideas from millennials because millennials are becoming the most important customer of franchising brands. You get your best intuitive sense of what's going on with a customer group if you happen to have some affinity for that customer group.
A&W saw that firsthand. Many of its smaller urban locations are managed by millennials, and they are among its most successful franchises.
So we intentionally thought we're going to actually go out and try and find those folks and bring them into our business, and thus we created what we call our Urban Franchise Associate Program.
An urban location like this would normally have a franchise fee of $350,000, but A&W's Millennial program meant 31-year-old Barmy Malley bought this franchise for less than half that.
Either I had to wait 10 more years to accumulate that cash and then to invest, or I had the opportunity to go with this program. That's why I'm like, okay, I knew this is it for me.
Malley was also offered special financing, extended training, and unlike non-millennial owned locations, she doesn't have to own the building. She's allowed to lease it from A&W Canada.
I always wanted to run my own business.
She and many others her age are getting a chance to do just that.
So we have 3 candidates that are serious for starting in 2018 and hopefully one in the U.S., so Chicago. We're just waiting on registration for that state.
Back in Boucherville, Quebec, the poster child for successful young entrepreneurs says his generation is making the most of the opportunity.
I think millennials are probably one of the most resourceful generations, even though we don't necessarily characterize them as such.
Perhaps it's time to change that characterization. Aaron Saltzman, CBC News, Montreal.
Now, the big picture with franchising is that it is undeniably big business in this country. There is SprayNet and A&W, but think of every McDonald's, Tim Hortons, Subway, Remax even, in real estate. Those businesses employ, directly or indirectly, almost 1 in 10 Canadians. And altogether, they generate $96 billion in sales every year. That's a big chunk of all retail in Canada.
Next on The National, we'll show you how 3 Canadians who died in the First World War were finally identified a century later. But first, meet a rising Canadian star who I literally had never heard of before today, but some are calling him the next Justin Bieber.
You know that you don't ever have to feel like no one's on your side.
15-year-old Johnny Orlando has just signed with Universal Music. You may not have heard of him, but your kids probably have.
Oh my goodness, I have a fan account at Jae-in Orlando, and I love him. His music is the best, so I have like almost all of his songs.
The Toronto-born singer-songwriter has followed a tried and tested path to fame: social media. More than 8 million followers on his YouTube and Instagram accounts, and tens of millions of views on his music videos.
The first video I ever posted was Mistletoe by Justin Bieber, and I had my flat hat on sideways. I was like in an Abercrombie too big for me shirt, and I was just like a little kid just making a music video for fun. I did probably like 50 shows or 40 shows, which was kind of crazy because 2 years ago was like my first show ever.
His latest song dropped just last week, and it's already making waves worldwide.
All these countries overseas that I've never been to, it's like #1, #2.
So what's next for this young Toronto kid?
In 5 years, I want to be like, I think that's when the peak of like my career is, like Justin Bieber. So I want to be like doing stadiums, just meeting a ton of fans from around the world.
What's clear is he's got no shortage of fans here in Canada.
I was always kissing you. My brother thinks that you're my fault.
Tonight on The National, a Quebec judge has authorized a class action lawsuit against the founder of Just for Laughs. Gilbert Rozon is accused of sexually assaulting or harassing at least 20 women. Those behind the suit want $10 million in punitive damages plus additional compensation for each victim. Rozon resigned from Just for Laughs last fall, but he's denied wrongdoing. Police in Halifax say a Liberal MP accused of sexual assault will not face charges. Francis Drouin was accused of groping a woman last month at a bar near where a Liberal Party policy convention was taking place. But he said it was a case of mistaken identity, that the woman accused the wrong guy. In a statement today, Drouin said he was pleased the issue was resolved based on the facts. And in New York State today, a legal victory for the parents of a 30-year-old man who refused to leave home. Michael Rotondo has been ordered by a judge to pack his bags and move out. His parents said they asked him several times to leave, even issuing him formal eviction letters and offering him $1,100 to find a place to stay, but he refused to go, so they took him to court. Rotondo says he plans to appeal the ruling. Well, 3 soldiers buried on a nearly forgotten battlefield will finally be laid to rest by their families. The Department of National Defence program is working to identify Canada's missing war dead. Cameron McIntosh tells us about the accidental discovery of the 3 bodies of these Manitoba soldiers and how scientists uncovered their names and stories.
They fought on the fields of the First World War and never left. Buried where they fell, their names lost for a century. Private Henry Edmonds Priddle, Sergeant Archibald Wilson, and Private William Dell Donegan, now identified through science and the help of distant relatives.
I considered it a duty and an honor.
Including John Hayes, Donegan's great-great-nephew.
It's the connection. It's somebody died for a cause, and lay in that battlefield for practically 100 years.
All 3 soldiers enlisted here in Winnipeg and served with the 16th Battalion Canadian Expeditionary Force. All of them lost their lives during the Battle of Hill 70, often referred to as Canada's forgotten victory. In the summer of 1917, Canadians took the strategic hill near Laon in German-occupied France. Nearly 10,000 Canadians died here. Many still lie beneath unnamed headstones. These 3 never even got that. They were buried on the battlefield in makeshift graves, found nearly a century later during the construction of this prison.
Knowing who was in the area when, we can put together a list of potential candidates of soldiers.
Anthropologist Sarah Lockyer examined the skeletons and military records, then went to genealogy sites, looking for living relatives who could provide DNA. She got 3 positive IDs.
We're able to give them back their identity and give them back their name. And at the end of the day, that's just a small part of something that we can do for these soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice.
It's a good idea. I think it's one of those things that has to be done.
Last year, a memorial was put in place at Hill 70, but much remains forgotten. There are at least 1,300 unidentified soldiers buried here. Later this year, 3 will finally be laid to rest under their own names. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
The DND's Casualty Identification Program has located and identified the remains of 11 First World War and 19 Second World War soldiers in recent years. But there are still more than 27,000 Canadian soldiers with no known grave.
There was a first on Parliament Hill today. Karina Gould, the Minister of Democratic Institutions, made history when she returned to work with her baby Oliver in tow. She is the first cabinet minister to take a maternity leave. We asked her what that's been like, and that is our moment of the day.
It feels great. I'm doing the baby and the job. How are you going to sort that out today, starting today?
We're going to sort it out today.
Yeah. And are you going to be bringing the baby into the house, do you think?
Well, we're going to play it by ear. So we're going to see. But obviously, if he needs to come in with me, he'll come in with me. And if not, then he'll hang out with Dad.
Are you getting any sleep?
I am actually, yeah. So being a cabinet minister is good training for being an early parent. Well, easing in is kind of figurative when it comes to being a minister. But I'd say that, over the past 4 weeks, I was easing in. Oh, it's okay. That's our job, right? And so, fortunately, babies are fairly portable. He just had a nap. He's just woken up. And so we'll head back into the house and away we go.
Now, he was wearing a shirt that said political advisor to the minister, which was just adorable. But it is worth pointing out that there is no parental leave for people on the Hill. So she took 10 weeks off. That was her choice. And they're sort of their own bosses, so they can figure it out. But there is nothing because they don't pay into EI the way other Canadians do.
Right. And I mean, we wish her all the best, right? I mean, I have 2 kids, and I remember being really, really tired when I went back to work, and I wasn't even the one physically giving. Anyways, all the most respect to her. That's the National for this Tuesday, May 22nd. Good night.
Night.